Thank you. It's great to be with you here today. The topic that I'm going to talk about is service businesses and the inevitable decline of interaction. When we think of service, what we usually think about is some type of an interactive business where we have customers interacting with employees in order to meet customer needs. Now, that's different from another type of business which is non-interactive, such as auto manufacturing. The customer is not really involved in the auto manufacturing process, but in fact the customer benefits from the process by using the commodities, the products that come out of the manufacturing process. The customer is somewhat separated or segmented from that process there. They don't have interaction with the process but receive benefits nonetheless. So we see for a service business we have interactive processes. For another type of business, make-to-stock manufacturing for example, they're not as interactive processes. So let's talk about one of these, which is transportation. If we have a transportation need, we need to get to work, we need to get to school or wherever, one option could be to drive our own car. But that's not the only option. Another option could be perhaps to rent a car. If we're traveling, for example, to a distant location, we might want to rent a car. Another option might be to use what we would consider maybe a full service option, which is to take a taxi to use some public transportation that's a little bit more interactive. So we have a very interactive offering that we would call full service. We have a quasi-interactive offering where we're interacting with some resource of the provider, which we would call self-service, where the customer is really doing a lot of the work themselves. Or we have the offering which is DIY, the do-it-yourself, where the customer uses their own resources to meet their needs. So that's an example from transportation. This scope or breadth of interaction in offerings actually exists in a lot of different industries. Another example could be food service. So we might have a full service offering, going to a restaurant where we interact with employees that ask us questions about what we'd like, answer our questions, and help meet our needs. We can have a self-service option where the customer comes in and does a lot of the work themselves using the provider's resources, or a do-it-yourself option where you purchase the ingredients and the supplies and the equipment that you need, and you meet your own needs in your own kitchen in this particular situation. Exercise, same kind of model. We could have a full-service option, which could be to hire a personal trainer that works with us to help meet our fitness needs. We could go to the gym where it's self-serve, where we meet our own needs using the resources of the gym provider, or we could just purchase equipment and do it in our own domain there and meet our own needs in a do-it-yourself alternative. So we think about all these different options. You know, full service has really been kind of a tradition in a lot of industries. In fact, some of the companies that we think of that are full service companies might include things like the Ritz-Carlton hotels, where they meet the needs of guests even as they claim the unexpressed needs of their guests. Another example is Nordstrom. So Nordstrom is known for having world-class full service at the retail locations. I remember my first time going to a Nordstrom. I showed up at work one day without a tie, back in the days when I wore ties to work. And I went over to Nordstrom to get a tie, and I basically got an extreme makeover there with this tie. I mean, it was probably the most well-thought-out tie that I've ever owned, because that employee worked with me to help determine if I was an autumn or a winter, or I don't remember what I was. But anyway, you know, very interactive full-service offering. Another one is Singapore Airlines. They're known for this, of having employees that are there to meet your needs and your beck and call for this. So we think about these full-service options, and this has really been, when we think about service, this is the epitome of service. Let's think about retail a little bit. Now, Nordstrom has this full-service offering. That full-service approach actually has existed for many centuries. In fact, if we go back, 100, 150 years ago, what we find is a general store, maybe something like this, where we have an employee who has skills and understands the availability of goods that can meet customer needs. We have a customer with some, preferences and, needs that they have to have filled. And the customer interacts with the employee and discusses what the needs are and the best way to meet those needs, what are the available resources would be appropriate. Something actually happened that was a little bit shocking in October of 1917. This man, who is Clarence Sanders, actually was granted a patent. It was U.S. patent number 1,242,872. And the patent, in essence, said the following. It said, "The object of my said invention is to provide a store equipment by which the customer will be enabled to serve himself." Now, how is he going to accomplish this? It says, in so doing, he will be required to review the entire assortment of goods carried in stock, conveniently and attractively displayed. After selecting from a list of goods desired, he will be required to pass through a checking and paying station at which the goods may be billed, packaged, and settled on before retiring from the store, thus relieving the store of a large portion of the unusual incidental expenses or overhead charges required to operate it, as will be here and after more fully described and claimed, blah, blah, blah. So it goes on in the patent document. So this guy, Clarence Sanders, actually invented self-service retail. And he formed a store that was actually, it even exists today. The store is called Piggly Wiggly. And Piggly Wiggly was the original self-service retailer. A brilliant idea. Well, self-service innovations were many in his store. Some of the things that were part of the Piggly Wiggly innovation included things like putting prices on individual items so that the customers could determine the prices themselves. This gentleman here, Mr. Goldman, actually invented the first shopping cart. So they actually had shopping carts that allowed customers to go and collect the goods that they needed. And the idea of having a cashier station where the customers have to pass the station before they leave the store, that was an invention of Clarence Sanders. And you notice here in this store, they actually had a fence here, basically keeping customers from leaving the store without paying. These days, retailers are a lot more liberal about that. But in those days, you can imagine, Clarence Sanders, he had this great idea, but a lot of people probably thought he was crazy. They thought, they'll rob you blind. Customers aren't capable of selecting their own goods. Their customers are not motivated or willing to do it. Well, of course, those naysayers would have been proven wrong. Well, unfortunately, Clarence Sanders, because of some bad financial deals as part of Piggly Wiggly, he lost control of Piggly Wiggly. So in February of 1937, he started another store, which was called Kuduzylle. And it was run by electricity. So this is a newspaper excerpt. Clarence Sanders sighted along the comeback trail today from behind an impressive array of electrical gadgets in a bright new store he calls Kuduzylle. The Kuduzylle, in which electricity conveys the customer purchases to him and adds up his bill, will open about March 6th. Sanders said the name doesn't mean anything particularly. So basically, how it works is the customer comes into the store and is given this little device which is called a key. And it's a little mechanical device that has paper tape on it. And what the customer does is sees these displays of all the different items, and the customer, if the customer wants an item, puts the key in the little receptacle place there for it, and then pushes the button to select that item, kind of like a vending machine. And what happens is when they put the key in, it punches a hole in the paper tape indicating what item was purchased, and it also simultaneously triggers some conveyor belt or some racks in the back that cause the items to go down a chute that's provided for the customer. And then when the customer gets to the checkout, the customer provides the key. The cashier has a machine that can read the paper tape off of the key and determine the prices. They can settle the bill, and then the package magically appears and the customer has what they need to go. Pretty amazing. Now, it failed, unfortunately. I believe it was probably ahead of its time, though. The self-service retail, this whole concept that began, again, really in 1917, this concept is really dominant throughout retail today. We find out that in almost all retailers that they use the self-service model of retail. Now, what about Nordstrom? Nordstrom had a different model. The customer still can go in and browse things, but it was really the full-service model, not the self-service model. It was very customer interaction intensive in that process. How has Nordstrom done in recent years? Well, in the last decade, you can see this from the press, Nordstrom has actually closed about 200 of their full-service stores. But Nordstrom as a company continues to grow. How do they grow? Well, their new concept, it's not really new, it's been around since I think 1973, but it's a concept that's really becoming Nordstrom today, is called Nordstrom Rack. And Nordstrom Rack is really the self-serve model. It's rows and rows of items without all the highly skilled extreme makeover employees, but it's basically a self-service model there. And in fact, today there are more Nordstrom Racks than there are actually Nordstrom flagship stores. There may come a day, I don't know, where Nordstrom will have only one flagship store and then all the rest of them are Nordstrom Rack stores. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But we do know is that this shift to self-service is happening in retail and it's happening at Nordstrom. This shift is actually in a lot of different industries. So I've looked at a lot of industries where you can see the same phenomenon occur, where we have at one point a full service offering, but over time, what happens is that interaction decreases and decreases to the point where the customers are really expected to serve themselves. So let's look at banking as an example. 30 years ago, banking was really this kind of thing, where it's people going in, interacting with other employees, customers interacting together to do financial transactions. And in about 1982, I was working in the San Francisco Bay Area, and at that time, Bank of America was really pushing the idea of having more automatic teller machines around. Now, automatic teller machines were actually invented, I believe, back in the late 60s, but they really didn't catch on until about the 80s. And again, it's this idea that maybe people were skeptical of this. They were kind of fearful of interacting with a machine and not trusting that machine with their money or something like that. Well, despite skepticism or people having fears about the technology, it just took off. And today, I think, when I talk to audiences, I think what we'll find is that most people actually almost prefer interacting with an automatic teller machine because it's more flexible, it's in control, they tend to be in more geographic locations and so forth. Another example of this concept of moving from full service to self-service is stockbrokers or insurance brokers. So for stockbrokers, we see that in the olden days, the stockbroker would meet with the client or the insurance broker, talk about options, kind of interact in order to determine what the best investments are for stocks or for insurance. Whereas in this day and age, the companies that did that were like Smith Barney and Merrill Lynch. In this day and age, a lot of people just do it on their own. They go online and use, for stockbrokers, for example, E-Trade or Scottrade. And these companies are really taking off. They become very popular, large amount of market share. Meanwhile, over here, the full-service brokers, like the first 10 years of this decade, Smith Barney actually had to lay off about 3,500 brokers, and we know that Merrill Lynch, they almost went bankrupt before they were acquired by Bank of America. So again, we see this shift from full service to self-service. Travel agents is another example. You probably don't remember the day where if you wanted to book an airline flight or any kind of travel, you had to go to the travel office and meet with people and interact, and they would actually write out your ticket, your airline ticket on this red triplicate paper and stuff like that. Well, in this day and age, we really like to go online and use online resources like Travelocity or Orbitz or Expedia and things like that. Airlines, same kind of idea. Airline ticket counters and airline check-in counters and such like that. 20 years ago, this was kind of the only way that we really had the option to interact with the airlines. But in this day and age, we have things like the self-check-in, where you can go to the airport and basically scan your ID or your passport or whatever, and you check yourself into the airline. And I remember the first time that I went to the Salt Lake airport and Delta had these things set up there, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to use that. I'm a medallion member. I expect full service. So I went straight up to the counter and bypassed these. And I said, I want to check in. And the employee there was very polite, and she said, oh, okay, come with me. And I said, where are we going? So I followed her over to the kiosk, and she said, well, let's see your passport. So I showed her my passport. She scanned the passport. She said, okay, is this your flight here? And we did the flight. I was like embarrassed there. It's like everybody looking at me like, what's wrong with this guy? Can't he operate a kiosk on his own? And I vowed after that point, after that experience with that person condescendingly, walking me through this process of using the kiosk, I vowed that I would never again just go straight to the desk. I would just do it on my own and avoid that embarrassment. That's exactly what they wanted. They, in essence, trained me as a customer in using the self-service technology. Ryanair is an airline in Europe that really tries to do this to a great degree, to get the customers to do as much as possible. So I actually flew from Marseille, France to Porto, Portugal once. The price, I just checked it yesterday, the price there for airfare was about 19 euro. Now when I flew, this was probably half a dozen years ago, I actually spent 7 euro for my flight from Marseille, France to Porto, Portugal. An amazingly low price. Well, Ryanair actually has some add-ons. So for example, I call them interaction fees. One of these is the reservation fee. If you want to talk to a person to make a reservation, you have to pay an additional 20 euro, either on the phone or with their call centers or at the airport. To check in at the airport, if you want to check in and talk to a person, it'll cost you 45 euro. If you want to print your boarding pass, if for some reason you come to the airport without a boarding pass, that'll cost you 20 euro. If you want to do a bag check, meaning check a bag on the plane, so they have to actually take your bag. That costs you between 15 and 35 euro. But if you don't do it in advance, meaning if you don't do it online, if you actually go to the restaurant and check, the airport, and check a bag, actually at the counter there, they'll charge you between 30 and 75 euro. That particular day when I flew from Marseille to Porto, my flight was 7 euro. I had 2 bags that I checked with me. One was 15 euro, the other one I think was 45 euro. My bags actually cost a lot more than I cost to fly. In retrospect, I should have just bought 3 seats, put dummy heads on the top of my suitcases, and seatbelted them into the seats there. It would have cost me a lot less money. Another thing that Ryanair does is they enforce that customers do their duty. And in my customer relationship management class, we really emphasize this, is that you have to have an appropriate relationship with your customer to assure that the customer understands their roles, and that as you understand your roles as a provider, that you have that appropriate synergy there. One of the ways that Ryanair does this is they actually have employees enforce these bag check things to make sure people aren't trying to sneak bags on the plane that really should have been checked at a higher price there. And in this particular day, I saw some customers putting their bags in this device. This particular woman, it took 3 people to get it out of the thing. If you can't get the bag out, I think they actually keep your bag, or they check it for you and charge you that higher price. Air France, and in fact, when I was in Marseille, I don't think it was this time, it was another time, when I went to do the self-check-in thing, the machine actually printed for me this little baggage tag that had the sticky tape on the back with instructions on it. So at the Marseille airport, if you check in with Air France, you don't even have to talk to anybody to put the tags on your bag. It just tells you pull off the back end of the thing, you wrap it around the handle, and you do all it yourself and just throw it onto the conveyor belt. The term for this is actually deservetization. Again, in my CRM course, we talk about deservetization in some detail. The concept of deservetization actually comes from the term servetization, which is largely originated out of the UK, and it's a very popular term in Europe. They actually call it servetization. They don't use the Z for it. They use the letter S for this. The servetization, it's kind of the opposite concept of deservetization. Let me describe it through a few examples. One example is Rolls-Royce. Now, besides making high-end automobiles, Rolls-Royce also makes jet engines. And for decades, they've been a primary manufacturer of jet engines that go into Boeing jets and Airbus jets and so forth. Well, not many years ago, Rolls-Royce, realizing there was a lot of price pressures in the jet engine manufacturing business, they decided to expand their revenues by moving into services. So they have this thing that they call power by the hour. And in fact, what happens is a Rolls-Royce will actually effectively lease the engine on an hourly basis to Delta Airlines or United Airlines or whatever airlines. And Rolls-Royce actually owns those engines on the planes. Even though the airline may own the rest of the plane, Rolls-Royce actually owns those engines, and they pay per hour of use. One thing that means is if there's something that goes wrong with the engine, it is not Boeing, or it's not Delta Airlines' responsibility. It is Rolls-Royce responsibility because it's their engine. And if those engines go down for some reason, Rolls-Royce pays dearly for that. So this is, again, an example of servetization, moving from a product manufacturing to more of a service model. IBM is another example of a servetization that's really happened in a major way. IBM traditionally has been a manufacturer of computer hardware and software. And in 2002, they actually purchased the technology arm of PricewaterhouseCoopers and formed IBM Global Technology Services and also IBM Global Services, where they actually do consulting on computer technology, even if it's not necessarily IBM technology. So they've kind of moved again more into the service realm. Final example of this is Pearson. So Pearson is a textbook publisher. They have all types of divisions producing all types of educational and other products. But in Pearson Education, their traditional model was as a textbook publisher, but they found out that, again, price pressures and other types of things, that's less of an attractive business to be in. So to expand their revenues, what they've actually done is moved into services. So now they provide online offerings, courseware and things like that some of you may have used. And this is becoming very popular for the service delivery, where people actually log in, students log in to Pearson servers in order to receive courseware and interact with instructors and so forth. Is servitization a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's good because we find it increases companies' revenues. But the problem that companies have discovered is it's very hard to do it profitably, because services are much less efficient than traditional manufacturing might be. In fact, in one study by a friend of mine, Andy Neely from the UK, from Cambridge University, he actually did a study looking at about 10,000 European companies. And what they found is the companies that moved from manufacturing to services had a decrease. They had some of the lowest net profit margins of any of the companies that they looked at. Surprisingly, the companies that moved from services into manufacturing, which is more of a deservetization model, actually had some of the highest profit margins. So what this means is that services are kind of a mixed bag here. Sometimes being in an interactive business model, it can provide good revenue opportunities, but it can be very costly to do that. So that leads to this idea of deservetization. So deservetization is really trying to accomplish this concept of achieving increased efficiencies and potentially higher profitability. A few examples that we might think about why this happens. So we think about a provider that has specialized skills, and we have a customer that has specialized needs, and we interact to meet those customer needs. But over time, what happens is the provider starts thinking about this and says, you know what? We perhaps can develop some type of self-service technology. We provide that technology to customers, and the customers use that technology on their own, and we have greater economies of scale, greater operating efficiencies, and thereby greater profitability. So that's kind of the model. And what that does is decreases the need for interpersonal interaction in the delivery of that service. This is promoted in different ways. One of the great examples of a company that promotes deservetization is IKEA. Have any of you been to IKEA? Yeah, it's crazy the way that they promote deservetization. Basically, promote customer self-serving rather than having interaction. They welcome you to the store, give you all the information you need. When you get in, they give you lockers. It's like, why? Am I an employee here? Yeah, you got to have your arms free. You're going to need them for something later. They have a place to drop off your kids if you need to. You don't want your kids bothering you because you're going to be busy in IKEA doing whatever they need you to do. As you go to their one-way escalator going up into the store, you see there are these things where you can borrow a big yellow bag. So they're going to give you all the resources you need. You're going to be collecting things. You better grab one of these things. They have signs that train you as you're going along through this ride here. This is up the escalator. They're teaching you about the return policy. They have signs at the top of the escalator. They have maps. They have pencils and paper and rulers that you can use. Again, it's kind of ominous here. They're telling you, hey, you're going to be doing this yourself, so you better be equipped for this. They have maps showing you how to get around the showroom, basically the instruction sheet here about how to navigate this. They do have these employees, but the employees I've discovered pretty much as I've asked them questions, they take me over and we read a sign together. So they have signs everywhere. They're very good at reading the signs. Some of the signs will teach you how to do things like purchase a chair. I was actually at an IKEA a few years ago looking for a microwave oven, and I asked them questions about it, and literally the employee took me over to the sign and we read it together. I thought, okay, thank you, I can read that, and then helps me make my decisions. When you get to the second story of the IKEA stores, your bag isn't enough, so they give you this little hand cart here that you can load stuff up, even more stuff in. They have these stations where you can actually go and design your new kitchen or things like that. I've actually never seen an employee at one of these stations. In fact, there's a sign on the station that says, who better than you to know what you need? You can do your own planning with the tools that we offer here. So again, they're providing customers with technologies that enable them to meet their needs. They have a restaurant where you can get food. Why should I clear my own table? They're training you how to be your own bus person there. On the way to the restroom, don't worry, I won't go into the details about how the restroom operates itself, but as you go there, there's these signs. Why isn't there an assistant when I need one? Why should I deliver my own furniture? Why do I have to assemble my own furniture? Everywhere you go in IKEA, they're training you in your responsibilities as a customer. You need transportation? Okay, here's the phone number of the taxi company. Here's the pencil to write it down. Here's the phone. Do it yourself. They say you can do it yourself, but you don't have to. They have these signs saying they provide delivery services, but you'll find out that without exception, these delivery services are independent companies. They will arrange delivery for you. They will arrange somebody to bring it to your house. If you need things assembled for you, they will refer you to somebody that will do it for you. Because IKEA is not in the business of providing full service. They're in the business of enabling customers to meet their own needs. As you go to check out, you're at the bottom part of the store. That's when they have the really big hand trucks that you use to pick up your goods. IKEA is one of the few places I know where people wait. There's longer lines at self-checkout than at the full-service interactive checkout, probably because the customers realize that if you're going to spend all that time in the store doing everything yourself, you might as well not ruin a good thing. As you leave the store, I saw this sign that said, "Co-workers only beyond this point." And at that point, hey, I feel like I'm a co-worker here as an employee. I'm pretty much a partial employee of the restaurant. Finally, let's talk about who's next in this. On the horizon, who is likely to be disintermediated? Universities. I'm a university professor. We teach classes. We have professors. This is Clayton Christensen from the Harvard Business School. That's why we like the brick and mortar universities, because we have all this interaction. And sometimes we compare that to the alternative, like the University of Phoenix, where people take their offerings online. We think that they're inferior. And who do they take their courses from? Well, Clayton Christensen. He actually has offerings, lectures that you can get at the University of Phoenix. And I would suggest that maybe these lectures at the University of Phoenix are pretty high quality in terms of the expertise and the knowledge that you get. In fact, Clayton actually said he thinks there will be wholesale bankruptcies over the next decade among traditional universities as they face competition from online offerings. Here at BYU, we have this guy, Norm Nemro, who is kind of legendary. He was an accounting professor some years ago. He realized that he was going to retire soon, so he went to a studio. Instead of teaching his classes, which were very popular, he developed a CD set. And to this day, he's retired, but his students still take the Norm Nemro experience by using the CDs and online offerings for that course. Healthcare. Healthcare is a very interactive business. I mean, here's somebody getting an immunization, but again, the technologies are becoming available now, and they'll be widespread very soon, I believe, where people will provide their own healthcare in their own homes. An example from my book that I actually think is a very poignant example is things like checking for strep throat. I don't mind taking my kids in to have them check for strep throat. What I mind is having to go find parking. I mind having to check in at the check-in desk, wait for a long time in the waiting room, and then have to wait for a long time for them to call me and let me know if my child is positive for strep throat or not. An alternative to this would be a deservetized system where if a parent recognizes their child might have a fever and want to check them for strep throat, they go to their medicine cabinet, get their strep throat testing kit out, they get the sample off the child's tongue, stick it in a little envelope, drop it off at a drive-in window, and get the call tomorrow. A lot easier system. It's a deservetized system that requires less interaction. Last slide, let's talk about death. Where are the limits of deservetization? Well, I actually got this in the mail not long ago. This is from a funeral home here located in Provo, Utah. They do funeral webcasting, where instead of having to actually physically go to the funeral, you can sit in the convenience of your living room and, pay your condolences to the dearly departed. So I don't know where the limits are of this, but I do know that this trend of deservetization, of moving to self-service, is becoming prevalent in many industries. What I also know is that we are going to see death of service interaction as we know it. Thank you.